Inside the story of the SS United States America's lost ocean liner, the morning mist of July 1952 still shrouded New York Harbor when it first emerged from the dry docks of Newport News, Virginia. Months earlier, a secret America had kept from the world. Now, moored at Pier 86, with its two immense smokestacks painted red, white, and blue, it awaited. The mist slowly dissipated over the Hudson River, revealing fragment by fragment the outlines of something the country had built before. A ship that refused to be called merely a ship. A machine that promised speed where before there had only been patience. A symbol that carried in its very name the weight of an entire nation. SS United States. The dockworkers moved silently that morning, observing a kind of reverence that no one had commanded. There was something about the presence of that nearly 300-meter hull that imposed silence. The smokers, the tallest ever installed on any ship in the world, rose 65 feet above the deck, leaning back at a calculated and when the ship was completely stationary. Red dominated the base of each smoker, then white, then blue at the top. Slightly different portions between the front and rear smokers to create an illusion of perfect perspective. Details that you would consciously notice, but that everyone would feel. Construction had begun in February 1950, in a shipyard that had just dismantled the unfinished hull of an aircraft carrier of the same name. The USS United States aircraft carrier number CV-58 had been cancelled after its keel was laid. Victim of political disputes over the future of naval aviation and nuclear aid. The dry dock that had briefly housed that aircraft carrier now received something different. Not an avowed warship, but something that could one. The Cold War heat up beyond what was bearable. The Newport News Shipbuilding and Dry Dock Company had a history stretching back to 1886, when Collis P. Huntington chose that spot at the mouth of the James River to build ships to serve his railroad network. Since then, the shipyard had built battleships, aircraft carriers, submarines, and ocean liners. But it had never built anything like what William Francis Gibbs had designed. It had never worked with such an obsession for safety. It had never kept so many secrets. Gibbs was a man who had waited his whole life for this. Born in Philadelphia in 1886, son of a successful financier, he had been a weak and timid child, incapable of basic mathematics, haunted by fears his schoolmates couldn't understand. When he was 8 years old, his father took him to the William Crump and Sons shipyard on the banks of the Delaware River to watch the launch of the liner S. Lewis. The ship rolled down the slipway, raising a cloud of smoke and spray as its hull touched the water. American flag waved, crowd cheered, and something changed permanently in the boy watching. From that day forward, William Francis Gibbs dedicated his life to ships. It didn't matter that he was terrible at math. It didn't matter that Harvard considered him a mediocre student who dropped out of engineering. It didn't matter that his father insisted he become a lawyer. During the day, Gibbs practiced law without enthusiasm. At night, he studied naval architecture on his own, teaching himself what the schools had failed to teach. On weekends, he and his younger brother, Frederick Herbert Gibbs, sketched ships on paper, calculated portions, and debated designs. The two brothers spent their summers in Spring Lake, Jersey, watching the ships that entered and left the New York waterway, re-evaluating each design that passed before them. In 1914, a childhood hobby had turned into an adult obsession. The Gibbs brothers had developed detailed plans for a 1,000-foot-long ocean liner capable of producing 180,000 horsepower. It was an absurdly ambitious project for two self-taught men. They found someone willing to listen. Admiral David W. Taylor, leader of the naval expansion program under Theodore Roosevelt, received the brothers and examined their drawings. Taylor saw something in the plans that others might have dismissed. He saw real technical knowledge hidden beneath the lack of formal credentials. He offered William Francis Gibbs a position as an apprentice, an opportunity to learn by doing what books had failed to teach. World War I interrupted dreams of luxurious ocean liners. Gibbs spent the war years working for the government, coordinating the conversion of captured German ships for American use. In 1922, he and his brother founded their own naval architecture firm, Gibbs Brothers, Inc. Their first major contract was to convert the Vaterland, a German ocean liner captured during the war, into the SS Leviathan, the largest ship under the flag. When the German shipbuilders Blohm und Voss demanded over $1 million for the original plans, Gibbs decided to redesign the entire ship himself. Between 100 and 150 draftsmen documented every detail of the existing ship and created a new layout from scratch. The Leviathan sailed successfully. Gibbs' reputation grew. In 1929, the firm became Gibbs & Cox after incorporating yacht designer Daniel Hargett Cox. Over the next few years, the company designed a series of sleek white ocean liners for the Nats lines, ships that sailed the route of Hawaii. The first of these, the SS Malolo, launched in 1927, dramatically proved the effectiveness of Gibbs' methods. During sea trials, the Malolo was rammed by a freighter that tore a huge hole in the hull, damaging the engine room. The damage was so severe that Gibbs' mentor, Admiral Taylor, believed the ship would sink immediately, but the Malolo remained afloat, kept afloat by the watertight compartments and safety features that Gibbs had insisted on operating. The ship was towed back to the shipyard and repaired. Gibbs' reputation as an obsessive about safety was cemented. World War II transformed Gibbs and Cox into the world's largest naval architecture. Between 1940 and 1946, 63% of all American merchant ships, over 2,000 tons, and 70% of all US Navy ships were built following Gibbs and Cox design or work plan. Destroyers, landing ships, minesweepers, tankers, cruisers, and above all, the Liberty ships, the mass-produced cargo ships that kept supply lines open to Europe. Gibbs didn't just design ships, he revolutionized shipbuilding. He proved that different parts of a ship could be built in different places and assembled, reducing production time from years to weeks, in some cases days. When the war ended, Gibbs was ready to resume his childhood dream, the grand ocean liner he had imagined since he was a boy, which he and his brother had sketched on paper for years, which the First World War had interrupted, finally become a reality. The economic, political, and technological conditions were finally aligned. The United States lines needed a ship to partner with the SS America, its ocean liner that was finally beginning its intended transit career after serving as a troop transport during the war. The American government had learned from the experience of the Cunard Line, whose Queen Mary and Queen Elizabeth had transported millions of soldiers during the conflict. A luxury ocean liner that would be quickly converted into a troop transport was a valuable military asset. In March 1946, John Franklin, president of United States Lines, met with William Francis Gibbs at the company's offices in New York. They agreed to build nothing less than the largest ship in the world. The new ocean liner would possess unparalleled speed and be capable of winning the coveted prize for the fastest crossing of the Atlantic Ocean. Blue ribbon. Franklin had chosen for the job a Harvard dropout, a former lawyer, a self-taught naval architect who, despite his lack of formal training, had graced the cover of Time magazine as America's leading maritime architect. For the United States, Gibbs used a time-tested formula for maximum speed, combined maximum power with light displacement, long, slender hull. For lightness, he used aluminum in the superstructure, a choice no ocean liner had made on such a scale before. Aluminum was more expensive than steel, but significantly lighter. Every pound saved in the superstructure meant more capacity for machinery, more speed, more efficiency. The United States would weigh 45,400 tons dead wet, compared to the 77,000 tons of Cunard's Queens, ships of similar size. Speed. Gibbs installed high-pressure steam turbines developing 240,000 horsepower. To put that number into perspective, the Queen Mary, which held the transatlantic speed record since 1938, produced approximately 160,000 horsepower. The United States would have 50% more power than any ocean liner ever built. This power would be transmitted to 4 propellers, 2 4-bladed and 2 5-bladed. The configuration tested and selected for its superior hydrodynamic performance. The propeller design was overseen by Elaine Kaplan, one of the rare female engineers of the time, a pioneer in a profession almost exclusively male. But speed meant little if the ship didn't survive to cross the finish line. Gibbs had spent decades studying maritime disasters, analyzing what had gone wrong in each case, incorporating the lessons into his designs. The SS Morro Castle fire in 1934, which killed 137 people off the coast of New Jersey, demonstrated the dangers of flammable materials on passenger ships. The sinking of the RMS Titanic in 1912, caused in part by an inadequately small rudder, taught the importance of maneuverability at high. The fire and sinking of the SS Normandy in 1942, while being converted into a troop transport in New York Harbor, showed that even docked ships were not safe for fire. Gibbs determined that the United States would be virtually fireproof. No wood would be used in the entire ship's structure, except for the lock in the butcher's kitchen, item that meat suppliers insisted was essential. Every piece of furniture, every fabric, every curtain, every carpet would be made of non-flammable materials. Glass, metal, and fiberglass replaced the wood traditionally used in ocean liners. Asbestos-impregnated panels would line the interior structures. The hangers in the luxury cabin closets would be made of aluminum. The ballroom grand piano was originally designed in aluminum, although Steinway protested that this would affect the instrument's tonal quality. Gibbs finally accepted a mahogany piano, but only after a dramatic demonstration in which gasoline went into the wood and lit a light, without the wood catching fire. The outer decks, traditionally covered with teak, would receive a green latex composite called Neotex. Every detail was designed to eliminate the risk of fire. Gibbs even had a complete passenger cabin built at the National Bureau of Standards testing facilities, fitted with fireproof furniture designed by interior designer Dorothy Mark, then set on fire. All personal effects, clothing, paper, perfume, and luggage were incinerated. The cabin furniture, although charred, remained intact down to the curtains. Construction began on February 8, 1950, with the placement of the first 55-ton prefabricated section installed without formal ceremony to speed up assembly. The United States would be the first large ocean liner built almost entirely in dry dock, a decision that both simplified the construction process and facilitated Gibbs' obsession with secrecy. In dry dock, away from prying eyes, the design details could be kept secret. The tapered shape of the hull, specially designed propellers, the configuration of the machinery, everything would remain hidden until the moment the ship was launched into the water, making it impossible for foreign spies to study most sensitive components. The secrecy wasn't just Gibbs' paranoia. The United States was a joint project between the United States Lines and the U.S. Department of Defense. The construction cost, the shipping company contributed $25 million, the U.S. government $20 million. The government paid an additional $25 million for the incorporation of national defense features design. These features included watertight doors up to decade, a width calculated our passage through the Panama Canal with only 60 centimeters of clearance on each side, capacity to support 14,000 soldiers for 10,000 miles without fire. Should the ship need to be converted into a troop transport, the propulsion plant was developed in unusual cooperation with the Navy, resulting in a militarist design. The engine room layout was similar to that of the large Forrestal-class aircraft carriers, with isolated engineering spaces, redundancies, and backup systems. If one engine room was damaged, the other could keep the ship moving. If one propeller shaft failed, the other three would continue to function. Each critical system had a backup, and each backup had its own backup. More than 3,000 shipyard workers brought the project from keel laying to delivery in just 2 years and 3 months. The prefabrication technique that Gibbs had perfected during the war allowed for rapid progress. Sections were built in separate workshops and assembled on the shipway, like pieces of a giant jigsaw puzzle. The whole comprised 183,000 separately manufactured sections. Unlike traditional shipbuilding, where each piece was cut and fitted on site, the United States sections arrived ready for installation, each numbered and labeled according to Gibbs' drawings. On June 23, 1951, the ship was christened and launched. Lucille Connolly, wife of U.S. Senator Tom Connolly, served as godmother. A bottle of champagne was smashed against the black painted bow, and the largest ship ever built entirely in the States glided into the water for the first time. Unlike other launches, where the ship was placed in the water with empty engine rooms, the United States already had all its propulsion systems complete, thanks to dry dock construction and Gibbs' modular technique. The following months were devoted to interior finishing, and Dorothy Marquardt and an Urquhart interior design. Urquhart and Marquardt had been given the monumental task of decorating the ocean liner. The firm was a rarity at the time. Interior design company run entirely by women. Marquardt and Urquhart had previously worked on the SS America and were familiar with Gibbs's requirements. They knew they would have to create luxurious interiors using only non-flammable materials. The goal was to create a contemporary and modern look that emphasized simplicity rather than palatialism, understated elegance rather than glitz and glamour. The designers wanted to replicate the smooth lines seen on the ship's exterior and visualize its speed. To achieve this aesthetic, the ocean liner was furnished with mid-century modernist decor, amplified by the abundant use of doors, and the passenger corridors, with their white walls and dark floors, had an almost austere appearance compared to European ocean liners, which favored carved wood paneling and elaborate ornamentation. Aluminum was incorporated extensively into the artwork, allowing the pieces to be lightweight, fireproof, and to match the black and silver theme. Nearly 200 aluminum sculptures decorated the first-class staircase, with a large eagle and emblems of birds and flowers from each American state on the landings of each deck. Hildreth Emiire, an artist famous for her murals, created a representation of the Mississippi River for the cabin-class lounge, executed in white and gold plaster on silver leaf panels. Austin Purves contributed other works, all made in fireproof media, glass, metal, and enamel. Sea trials in June 1952 confirmed what Gibbs had known from the start. The ship was a machine of unprecedented speed. During full power trials on June 10th, the United States reached an astonishing speed of 32 knots, equivalent to more than 40 miles per hour. No passenger ship had ever sailed so fast. The speed was kept secret, along with many other design details, because the American government did not want potential adversaries the ship was capable of. In public, United States Line spoke only of speed sufficient to win the Blue Ribbon, without specifying numbers. 5 days before its maiden voyage in July 1902, the SS United States opened to the public at its birthplace in New York City. 70,000 people turned out to see the stunning new ship that day, more than the capacity of a packed Yankee Stadium. The line to board stretched for 14 blocks. New Yorkers, tourists, and ship enthusiasts jostled at the west side docks, waiting for hours for the chance to walk the decks of the largest passenger ship ever built in America. What they found on board was unlike any ocean liner they had ever seen. The interiors were modern, clean, almost austere by European standards. The first-class observation lounge, with its hand-woven curtains by Dorothy Leeds, one of the most influential textile design, offered ocean views through large windows. The ballroom, with its fire-resistant mahogany piano and dance floor, was prepared for evenings of music and celebration. The library, smaller than those found on British Queens, offered a carefully curated selection of volumes for passengers who preferred reading to socializing. The cabins varied dramatically according to class. The ship operated on the traditional 3-class system, similar to the Titanic, with 900 for passengers in first class, 524 in cabin class, 554 in tourist class. First-class passengers occupied the best spaces in the center of the ship, away from the vibration of the propellers and the impact of the waves on the boat. Their cabins had custom-made furniture, private bathrooms, and access to the best restaurants and lounges. The Duck Suite, the ship's most luxurious accommodation, comprised 3 cabins on the upper deck and typically chosen by the wealthiest passengers, from movie stars to members of the British royalty. The cabin class, in the middle of the hierarchy, offered respectable comfort without the excessive luxury of first class. Passengers in this class had their own lounges and restaurants, separate from first and third class. The tourist class, equivalent to third class, the hold of other ships, offered simple accommodations with double berths, basic furnishings, and shared bathrooms. Still, even the worst conditions on the United States were noticeably better than what was offered on other ocean liners. On July 3, 1952, purposefully coinciding with Independence Day celebrations, the SS United States set sail on its maiden voyage. The commander was Commodore Harry Manning, himself a celebrity. Manning had been Amelia Earhart's Sea pilot and was one of the few Americans to have received a paper ribbon parade in Manhattan more than once, first in 1929 after rescuing crew members from cargo ship Florida. Manning carefully avoided any promises of a record-breaking race, especially when the ship encountered Rock Bank on the first day of the voyage. On board were 1,700 passengers, including Margaret Truman, daughter of President Harry Truman. The passengers had paid significant prices for their tickets. The minimum first-class fare from New York to Southampton was $365, equivalent to almost $4,000 in today's money. For that price, passengers sailed on a luxurious floating resort, offering the refinement, service, and conveniences of best American. The ship's kitchens were designed to produce up to 9,000 individual meals per day. Provisions for a round trip included 216 pounds of caviar, 1,100 pounds of prime rib, 15,000 pounds of poultry, 5,820 dozen, a ton of cheese, and 12,468 litres of milk. For the maiden voyage, the ship carried 7,935 litres of ice cream and 500 pounds of caviar. The food was prepared by gourmet chefs under the supervision of the executive chef, served by an army of waiters trained to anticipate every passenger's need. Herman Mueller, chief purser, had one of the most difficult jobs on the ship. The affable veteran had begun his maritime career as a kitchen helper. 30 years later, he was in charge of a team of 760 men and women, out of a total crew of 1,050. His responsibilities included all food service, hotel services, keeping the ship spotless. He did it so well that the ship always smelled and looked as new as the day it left the shipyard. Mueller set the tone for passenger service, based on courtesy, a desire to serve, combined with a dignified demeanor and pride in a job well done. Good manners were essential, and certain lapses were avoided: chewing gum, cleaning fingernails, or combing hair in public, picking teeth, and arguing with passengers. The hotel crew, as it was called, included stewards, gourmet chefs, bellhops, flight attendants, bartenders, and waiters. Their job was to ensure the comfort of approximately 1,000 passengers. In first class especially, frequent flyers often requested not only their favorite suite, but also their favorite cabin steward. This arrangement pleased both passengers and stewards, who could expect generous tips and gifts at the end of the 4-day trip. The sailors, officers, engineers, and mechanics were responsible for ensuring the ship was properly maintained and operated. The bridge, situated at the highest point of the superstructure, offered a commanding view over the ship's bow. From there, Commodore Manning oversaw the operation of the world's fastest passenger ship, holding the lives of nearly 3,000 people in the palm of his hand. Someone once compared handling the SS United States to controlling a thoroughbred horse, extremely fast and responsive, but also a little nervous compared to its contemporaries. The fog that Manning had encountered on the first day dissipated, and the ship began to demonstrate its true capabilities. On the first full day of the voyage, the United States covered 606 nautical miles at a speed of 34.11, equivalent to almost 40 miles. No ship had ever sailed so fast in commercial service. For the next 2 days, the captain maintained the record pace. On July 7, 1952, at 5:16 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time, SS United States crossed the finish line at Bishop Rock of Cornwall, England. The crossing from New York had taken 3 days, 10 hours, and 40 minutes, at an average speed of 35.59 knots. The previous record, held by the Queen Mary for 14 years, had been surpassed by more than 10 hours. For the first time in 100 years, a ship flying the American flag held the transatlantic speed record. The SS Baltic had won the award in 1852, and now, exactly a century later, the blue ribbon returned to America. Whistles sounded, and applause could be heard throughout the ship. The band began to play, and some passengers who had stayed awake all night started a conga line. Many wore colourful hats and continued the gala party from the previous night, which had celebrated the imminent victory in France. Margaret Truman and other prominent passengers were on the bridge at the captain's invitation at the moment the finish line was crossed. On the return voyage, the United States also broke the westbound crossing record, returning to America in 3 days, 12 hours and 12 minutes, at an average speed of 34.51 knots. Thus, the ship achieved both the eastbound and westbound crossing records, and the Blue Ribbon did so all on its main voyage. In New York, the owners received the Hales Trophy, the tangible expression of the Blue Ribbon's competitiveness. The ship's return to the United States was marked by celebrations as it was escorted to New York by bands, helicopters, and small boats, greeted by a crowd of thousands. As a public symbol of the Blue Ribbon, the long blue flag was hoisted on its radar mast as it approached. Many people noticed that the fresh paint on the hull had worn away, apparently due to the high speeds at which it had travelled. The crew was officially welcomed into several days later with a paper ribbon parade on Broadway, escorted by over 2,000 people and greeted by a crowd of 150,000. The central figure of the event was the ship's captain, Commodore Harry Manning. The New York Times wrote on the occasion of the eastward crossing, "The new mistress of the American seas has arrived in this French port tonight wearing her laurels like an aristocrat." The ocean liner United States has shattered all speed records for commercial vessels and is being hailed here as a feat of maritime engineering whose performance has far surpassed rival shipping. The record did not reflect the ship's actual operating speed. Before the voyage, many expected a race between the United States and the British liner Queen Elizabeth for national pride over the ribbon. In 1951, Gibbs had instructed the crew not to beat the record by much, beat it by a reasonable amount, such as 30 knots. He hoped that Cunard Line, which operated the Queen Elizabeth, would then develop a slightly faster ship, and the United States would then intend record by sailing at a much. The United States' record speed was also tempered by safety concerns. The company understood that the crew was still inexperienced with the new ship and ordered them not to take unnecessary risks with extravagant speeds. The memory of the Titanic sinking influenced the caution of United States Lines' personal matter. Several of its leaders. CEO John Franklin was the son of White Star Line office manager Philip Franklin during the Titanic disaster. Company director Vincent Astor had asked his father, John Jacob Astor. Franklin was so concerned about a possible accident that he had written and sealed a message that would only be made public if there was a disaster during the United States maiden voyage. The message was never opened. The ship sailed without incident, proving that its combination of speed and safety was viable. The American public enthusiastically embraced the SS United States, which became known as America's flagship. During the 1950s, people from all over the world booked accommodations on the world's fastest ship. Well-known names of the time, including Bob Hope, Princess Grace of Monaco, Salvador Dali, Rita Hayworth, Harry Truman, the Duke and Duchess of Windsor, and Duke Ellington topped the ship's passenger list. Marilyn Monroe sailed the United States several times. Judy Garland made regular crossings. Cary Grant was a frequent passenger. The surrealist artist Salvador Dali, ever a discreet traveller, crossed the Atlantic aboard. Walt Disney not only travelled on the ship, but also used it as a setting for his 1962 film, on Voyage. Marlon Brando, John Wayne, Joan Crawford, Charlton Heston, Elizabeth Taylor, Sean Connery, Harry Cooper, Walter Cronkite, Coco Chanel all crossed the Atlantic on what was arguably the most prestigious passenger ship of the era. Royalty was also a constant presence. The Duke and Duchess of Windsor, who had been regular passengers on the rival Queen Mary, transferred their loyalties to the United States in the mid-1950s and reserved the Duck Suite, which was their favorite accommodation at sea. The King and Queen of Greece sailed aboard. Prince Rainier and Princess Grace of Monaco, herself a Hollywood star before her royal wedding, made multiple crossings. 4 American presidents sailed on the SS United States. Harry Truman, who was in office when the ship was built. Dwight Eisenhower, during and after his presidency. John F. Kennedy, while still a senator from Massachusetts, along with his wife Jacqueline, arriving from Southampton on October 11, 1955. And Bill Clinton, then a young graduate of Georgetown, on his way to Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar in 1960. A famous passenger of a different kind sailed aboard the SS United States in 1963, the Mona Lisa. Leonardo da Vinci's masterpiece was traveling to the United States for special exhibitions in Washington and New York. The painting traveled in a specially climate-controlled cabin under constant guard. It arrived at the Louvre in excellent condition for a 460-year-old lady. The ship established a routine of regular transatlantic crossings. It sailed regularly between New York, Le Havre, and Southampton, with occasional stops in Bremerhaven. The United States maintained a cruising speed of 30 to 32 knots, allowing it to maintain reliable flight transatlantic crossings. During the 1950s, it became one of the most sought-after ways to cross the Atlantic. Life on board followed a carefully choreographed rhythm. First-class passengers woke up in luxurious cabins, served breakfast in their rooms or in the main restaurant, spent their mornings in deck chairs or in the observation lounge, lunch in the restaurant, rested in the afternoon, dressed for dinner, had a formal dinner at 7 or 9 o'clock, and spent their evenings in the ballroom, the onboard cinema, bars. The day was structured by a series of organized activities: deck shuffling competition, bridge tournaments, horse races with betting, fancy dress parties. Purser Clarence Bob Gehrig had an incredible memory. A passenger could board the ship after several years of absence, and Gehrig would greet them by name, recalling some special detail that anyone else would have long forgotten. This kind of personalized attention was what distinguished the United States experience. An immigrant family that had endured the hunger and privations of post-war Europe might feel overwhelmed by the abundance of food available. Not wanting to risk going hungry between meals, a young family returned from the mess hall with bread and fruit stuffed in their pockets. The attentive purser made sure they had a fresh basket of fruit and sweets every day. A 4-month-old baby woke up hungry in the middle of the night. Responding to the call for assistance, a nurse in a white uniform appeared in the cabin with a baby bottle, wrapped in a white damask cloth, placed in a champagne bucket. It was these touches that made the SS United States so special. For those far from the coast or uninclined to travel, the United States reached them through news reports and even the movies. The ship became a floating film set for movies like Gentlemen Prefer Blondes 1953, Gentlemen Marry Brunettes 155, and Monster, Go Home. The ocean liner appeared in news broadcasts, subject of magazine art, symbol of what America could achieve when it combined engineering, ambition, and resources. The years passed at a steady pace. The crossings followed one after another, a machine functioning with precision for which it had been designed. The ship consumed enormous quantities of fuel on each crossing, but government subsidies and high fares covered the costs. The United States lines reported profits. Passengers continued to arrive. The blue ribbon remained firmly on the mast. Then, in October 1958, something changed. Pan American World Airways inaugurated the first transatlantic commercial jet service using the Boeing 707. What previously took 4 or 5 days by ship could now be done in approximately 7 to 8 hours by plane. The crossing that the United States had revolutionized with its record speed of 3.5 days could now be done in less than a morning. In the same month that the SS United States logged its first million miles sailed, passing the Statue of Liberty, the first transatlantic jet crossing marked the dawn of a new era in transportation. Even with its tremendous speed capabilities, America's mighty flagship could not compete with the speed of commercial jets. The economic threat posed by aircraft was initially dismissed as a passing fad. Shipping company executives argued that passengers would never abandon the comfort and elegance of an ocean liner for the cramped and noisy experience of an airplane. The ocean was still there. There would always be people who preferred to cross it the traditional way. Ships had space, luxury, romance. Airplanes only had speed. But speed was exactly what the modern world wanted. In 1957, For the first time in history, piston-engine airplanes carried more passengers across the Atlantic than ocean liners. The trend accelerated with the arrival of jets. By the mid-1960s, jet planes carried more than 90% of transatlantic traffic. The number of passengers on ocean liners plummeted. At the same time, unions were exerting increasing pressure on United States lines. Strikes began to disrupt service on several occasions. Just 2 days after the SS United States logged its first million miles, the early October 1958 eastbound crossing was cancelled due to a labor dispute with the masters, mates, and pilots union. Sadly, this proved to be the first in a series of devastating strikes that disrupted service and dealt a fatal blow to America's flag. During the 1960s, the ocean liner's reputation was permanently altered by strikes that forced the cancellation of voyages and the reallocation of passengers. A ticket no longer guaranteed a trip on board, and passengers and the company began to tire of the unreliable service. Cancellations and competition from airlines slowly drove customers away. In 1960, United States Lines refused to release its annual passenger count because it had become too low. In September 1960, the U.S. Department of Commerce announced that the contract to transport military dependents had terminated. It was a significant financial blow. The government was paying subsidies of up to $400 per passenger. The loss of the military contract eliminated an important source of guaranteed revenue. United States Lines desperately needed additional revenue. Government subsidy regulations prohibited the SS United States from deviating from its intended route in the North Atlantic. In 1962, after persistent lobbying by the company, the America's flagship received permission to cruise to destinations outside the North Atlantic. With minimum fares above $500, the cruise market proved more lucrative. The America's flagship became the most prominent cruise ship of the early 1960s. The SS United States traveled from New York to destinations such as Nassau, St. Thomas, Trinidad, Urara, and Cristobal. Winter cruises would help ensure the ship remained in service for most of the decade. But even cruises could not fully compensate for the loss of passengers on transatlantic crossings. In June 1961, United States Lines was the victim of another crippling strike. For the first time since its construction, the SS United States was completely shut down. Travel on both the SS United States and the SS America was again cancelled, and passengers. This further damaged the company's reputation. Passengers who had made reservations months in advance suddenly found their trips cancelled. Many simply booked plane tickets instead of rescheduling. Around 1963, anxiety about the future of the United States reached the crew members and corporate leaders, many of whom were uncertain about how long the ship would remain in service. 2 years later, another strike forced the cancellation of all summer voyages, costing the ship 9,000 passengers and the company $3 million. Despite the new cruise itinerary, the United States was the most expensive ocean liner to operate and was losing passengers to newer ships like launched in 1962. The France was larger, more modern in its core, and designed from the outset for the cruise era. The United States, with its three-class design and austere modernist interiors, increasingly seemed like a product of a rapidly fading era. The 1960s proved to be a decade of losses for the United States, both symbolically and financially. In 1964, it lost its original partner when the SS America was sold to foreign interests, becoming the SS Australis under the Greek flag. 4 years later, its main competitors, the Queen Mary and Queen Elizabeth, also disappeared. Although a new generation of ocean liners, particularly the Cunard France and Queen Elizabeth II, was introduced, both spent much of the year in cruise service, a role for which the United States was ill-equipped. The biggest blow came in 1911. The death of William Francis Gibbs, the naval architect who dreamed of this ship since he was 8 years old, who had spent almost half his life working to make reality, did not live to see its end. Gibbs died on September 6, 1967, 2 weeks after his 81st birthday. He was buried next to his brother Frederick, inseparable even in death. The day after Gibbs' death, the United States sounded a mournful whistle as it passed Gibbs' office in Lower Manhattan. The architect's favorite ship, on worked for nearly half his life, sailed for only 2 more years. During those final years, Gibbs used to call the ship's captain daily to inquire about performance. In the last few months, it was often a subordinate who answered, saying that Gibbs was too busy or in a meeting. In reality, the elderly architect was hospitalized. Fortunately, he never had to witness the premature retirement of his greatest achievement from service. In 1968, transatlantic routes were in terminal decline. with only the United States of France and the Queen Elizabeth conducting regular crossings. To distinguish itself from the competition, the United States began offering much longer voyages to distant ports in Europe, Africa, and South America. In January 1969, the ship made a cruise to Cape Town. It again became the most popular ship on the Atlantic, but it was a temporary success. In 1968, United States Lines was bought by Walter Kidd and COC, who believed the era of ocean liners had passed. To make matters worse, government subsidies for the ship were cut because there weren't enough passenger numbers to justify the ship received an annual government subsidy of $12 million. Despite this, in 1969, it lost $4.8 million, sealing the fate of the super transatlantic liner. An extension of the government subsidy was not granted when it was due for renewal at the end of 1969. In the summer of that year, rumors began to circulate that the Big U would be retired. There were also rumors that the administration was recognizing extra expenses related to other ships in the SS United States account. The unions continued to demand more and more money from the new administration. On October 25, 1969, SS United States returned from its 400th voyage and was ordered to begin its scheduled annual overhaul in Newport News earlier than planned. This measure cancelled a planned 21-day cruise, although reservations for future voyages were still being made. On the morning of November 7, 1969, America's flagship, champion of the Blue Ribbon, pride of the Merchant Marine, docked at Pier 86 in New York for the last time. That night, the SS United States quietly departed New York bound for Newport News, with a crew of 350. Most believed the ship would receive its customary annual overhaul and return to New York in time for the Christmas Caribbean cruise. Once in the shipyard, the SS United States was placed in a berth instead of the usual dry dock facility. While in Newport News for its scheduled annual overhaul, United States Lines announced on November 11th that United States was being taken out of service. While many saw the ship's decommissioning as inevitable, the decision came as a shock to passengers and crew. Without prior notice, newly laid-off crew members had only days to finish their work, while passengers awaited baggage was loaded onto the Leonardo da Vinci for a new cruise. Chief Mate Leslie Barton was the last man to register, finished with engines on the wheelhouse telegraph. The powerful engines of America's flagship would never again operate on power. The smokestacks were painted only on the port side, and work stopped abruptly. By the time of its retirement, the United States had made 800 transatlantic crossings, 400 round trips, covered 2,772,840 nautical miles, and carried over 1 million passengers. The decommissioning of SS United States in 1969 stunned officers and crew. Some left their equipment and personal belongings on board, anticipating a return to work the next day, only to find the gangway doors sealed. Although the ship's fate remained uncertain, its immediate future was secure. As a reserve vessel for the United States Navy, it was hermetically sealed in its berth to preserve interiors and machinery. Until 1978, it remained in stasis, always ready to be deployed should the situation require it. But the situation never demanded it. The era in which ocean liners could be converted into troop transports had passed. Jet planes could transport soldiers across the ocean in hours, days. The military necessity that had justified the construction of the United States, the ability to transport 14,000 soldiers for 10,000 miles without refueling, was obsolete when jets could do the same job much faster. In 1978, the United States Navy decided the ship was no longer relevant to its needs, and it was put up for sale. It then passed from owner to owner, each with grand plans for its future. Richard Hadley of Seattle planned to convert the ship into floating timeshare condominiums. After his funding collapsed, he had the ship's interior furnishings auctioned off in 1984. The 1984 auction was a devastating moment for those who loved the ship. Furniture that had been specifically designed for the fireproof interiors, artwork created by renowned artists, tableware bearing the United States Lines logo, everything was sold to the highest bidder. The items dispersed to private collections around the world, fragmenting the historical integrity the ship had maintained for decades. Fred Mayer, who bought the ship in 1992, thought to create a partner for Cunard's QE2. He had the ship towed to Turkey and then to Ukraine for the removal of hazardous materials, primarily asbestos, which had been used extensively in the interior panels. In Sevastopol, Ukraine, a team of 200 people worked to strip the ship's interior down to the bulkheads. Hundreds of tons of materials were unloaded at the docks and scrapped. Protests from Greenpeace and their ship Rainbow Warrior accompanied the process, concerned about the environmental risks of asbestos removal. In 1996, the ship was towed back to Philadelphia, where it remained docked at Pier 82 for the next 28 years. Edward Cantor bought the ship at auction with dreams of returning it to maritime service as a cruise ship. He soon changed his mind and offered the ship for sale for a staggering price of $33 to $34 million, although its value as scrap metal was estimated at only $2 million. Cantor passed away in 2002, and the ship was put up for sale again. In 2003, Norwegian Cruise Line purchased the ship at auction from Cantor's estate. NCL announced plans to restore the ship for service as part of NCL America, a newly announced American-flagged cruise service in Hawaii. The United States is one of the few ships suitable for such service because of the Passenger Service Act, which requires that any ship engaged in domestic trade be built and registered in the United States and operated by a predominantly American crew. In late 2003, NCL initiated an extensive technical review that found the ship to be in good structural condition and catalogued over 100 boxes of its blueprints. But the global economic crisis caused these plans to collapse, and the ship was put up for sale again in 2009. When Norwegian Cruise Line, which had purchased the ship in 2003, began accepting bids from scrap dealers after failing to sell it, the Conservancy managed to gather support, receiving a lifeline in the form of a grant from Philadelphia philanthropist HFF Jerry Lenfest. In 2009, the SS United States Conservancy was formed to save the ship by raising funds to purchase it. On July 30, 2009, Lenfest, a Philadelphia media entrepreneur and philanthropist, pledged a matching grant of $300,000 to help the Conservancy purchase the ship from NCL's parent company. Although Lenfest, a former United States Navy captain, did not consider the project economically viable, he was sympathetic to the ship because his father had been one of the naval architects who built it. Former President Bill Clinton also endorsed efforts to save the ship, having sailed on it in 1968. Susan Gibbs, granddaughter of William Francis Gibbs, became president of the Conservancy, dedicating her life to preserving her grandfather's legacy. She described the ocean liner as a lady waiting, a term that captured both the ship's decaying dignity and its hope for a better future. For more than a decade, SS United States Conservancy safely maintained the ship in its Philadelphia cradle, developed an international audience for the iconic symbol of its namesake nation, energetically stationary mixed redevelopment opportunity, built a significant museum collection of art and archival documentation, and acted as faithful custodians of the legacy of the historic ship and the millions of passengers, crew, and officers who walked its decks, ultimately preventing the ship from being scrapped. Since 1996, the ship had remained anchored in Philadelphia, a city that holds many old and forgotten things, where it appeared like a mirage from the parking lot of a shopping center across Columbus Boulevard, and surrealistically large. The size that had so impressed David Macaulay as a child, an immigrant who arrived in America aboard the ship in 1957, remained a visceral reminder of the enormity of the undertaking of crossing from coast to coast in the days before air travel. The ship measured nearly 1,000 feet in length, more than 100 feet longer than the Titanic, with 5 more decks. If you stood it upright, it would rise almost as tall as the Chrysler Building in New York or the Comcast Center in Philadelphia. As the fastest ocean liner ever built, SS United States could move almost faster in reverse than the Titanic could travel forward. One feeling prevailed among those who visited the ship in its cradle. The ship is still here. She has endured. Her lines, her form, her strength are all still apparent. There is a poignant sense that she is currently waiting to be illuminated again. Despite her lightweight frame, she was designed to be virtually indestructible. You can't set her on fire, you can't sink her, and you can't reach her, the ship's designer, William Francis Gibbs, used to say. But not even Gibbs could have saved her from economic inevitability. Maintenance costs were substantial, estimated at approximately $850 a day, or about $310,000 per year. Plan after plan to transform her into a casino, hospital ship, or museum had failed. Everyone had ideas. She was still quite sound, and removing the interior might actually facilitate her conversion. But none of the proposals had led to restoration. In 2024, due to a lease dispute, the ship was evicted from its pier. The pier operator wanted its space back, and the sale had been completed. There was no other location for the ship could be found. Okaloosa County, Florida, purchased it and to sink it near Destin to the world's largest artificial reef. The Okaloosa County Board of Commissioners voted to allocate $13 million for the entire project, including towing operations, remediation, purchase of the ship, and funding to help the SS United States Conservancy create museum in the Destin Fort Walton Beach area. The project has already seen a return on its efforts to promote the destined Fort Walton Beach destination, the ship's history due to the interest from public and world media. In February 2025, the SS United States was towed from Philadelphia, its home of nearly 30 years, and headed toward Mobile, Alabama, undergo preparations before being sunk and becoming the pride of the world's largest outer reef of the coast of Florida. In Okaloosa County, its new owners. The towing journey covered approximately 1,800 miles. It was an intricate task to tow a 990-foot ship that no longer had its own functioning engines. The planned departure from Philadelphia was delayed by the weather, but finally the ship set sail, passing the coast that had seen it born in Newport News so many decades before. In Mobile, the imposing smokestacks of the legendary SS United States were removed from the historic ocean liner. Rising 6 stories high and tilted backward, ship's record speed. Onyx structures would form a dramatic centerpiece of the SS Museum and visitor experience. The ship was now being prepared for deployment as the world's largest artificial reef of the coast of destined Fort Walton Beach, Florida. Prior to its deployment in the Gulf waters, all environmentally unsafe materials would be removed. This included all non-metallic items, wiring, and fuel. Passages would be opened to allow marine life to thrive in and around the ship. All preparations in Mobile were in close collaboration with multiple environmental agencies, including the Department of Environmental Protection and the Environmental Protection Agency. As the world's largest artificial reef, it would literally benefit the entire world. Marine species would be the biggest beneficiaries, as it would provide much-needed habitat for thrive. In addition to the usual reef fish species like red snapper and grouper, the size of the United States would also attract more pelagic fish species such as amberjack, mackerel, and tuna. Just as artificial reefs attract marine species, they would also attract divers and fishermen. This majestic ship would be appreciated by countless divers of all skill levels from around the world. The history and story of the SS United States would unfold as divers viewed its long deck and masterfully constructed hull. The lesson is simple. Beauty alone is not enough. Grand visions need resources. Resources without adaptation guarantee failure. The SS United States outlasted any other American ocean liner of its era because it was built to withstand the test of time. Designed by a man who had studied every maritime disaster in history, incorporated those lessons into work. But no amount of engineering beat economics. No amount of record speed can compete with a jet plane. No amount of nostalgia can pay maintenance bills. The ship survived 55 years after its retirement, longer than it sailed. It endured through auctions, asbestos removals, changes of ownership, peace disputes, and finally a 180-mile tow to its final destination. Who paid for the SS United States? The shipyard workers who built it, working 3 shifts to complete it in record time. William Francis Gibbs, who invested 40 years of his life in a childhood dream. The American government, which paid 2/3 of the construction cost for a ship that never served as a troop transport. The passengers who sailed on it, paying fares that subsidized a mode of transport that technology was making obsolete. The preservationists fought for decades to save it from being scrapped. How much does a dream cost? More than money. It costs vision, sacrifice, adaptation, and the humility to let great things live. Learning to serve new purposes. The SS United States will never sail the seas again, but it will serve in another way, as a habitat for marine life, as a destination for divers, as the centerpiece of a museum that will tell its story to future generations. The ship that was designed never to sink will find its final home at the bottom of the ocean, not as for wreckage, but as a living monument to it that has passed. The blue ribbon he earned in 1952 remains unmatched by any passenger ocean liner. No ship built since has equaled her speed in regular commercial service. The records she set on her maiden voyage remain in the books more than 70 years later. The dream of William Francis Gibbs, born as an 8-year-old boy watching the launch of a ship in Philadelphia, has been realized beyond all expectation. The USS United States, the cancelled aircraft carrier whose name and dry dock she inherited, was never completed. But the SS United States sailed for 17 years, carried over 1 million passengers, set speed records that remain unbroken, and survived for more than half a century after her retirement. She proved that American engineering could match and surpass anything Europe produced. She demonstrated that speed and safety were not mutually exclusive. She showed the world what a nation could achieve when it dedicated itself to create best. The red, white, and blue smokestacks behind its profile will be preserved in the museum that will tell its story. Artifacts salvaged from auctions and removals will be displayed for visitors who ever walked on its decks. The stories of the passengers and crew who sailed on it will be documented and archived for future researchers. And at the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico, hull that Gibbs designed to be virtually indestructible will become home to corals, sponges, fish, and all forms of marine life find refuge in structure. The ship that was built to transport people across the ocean will spend eternity at its bottom, still serving, still contributing, still relevant in ways its creator never have imagined. The dream didn't end. It just changed form. The lady who waited so long finally found her purpose. Not the purpose Gibbs envisioned as a boy. Not the purpose United States Lines intended when they commissioned her. Not the purpose the Navy hoped for when they helped pay for her. A new purpose, suited to a new era, serving in ways no one in 1952 could have foreseen. The SS United States, the fastest ship ever built. The lifelong dream of a boy who couldn't do math. The pride of a nation at the height of its industrial power. A symbol of a bygone era. And now, reef that will sustain life for generations to come. The history of the SS United States is the history of America in the 20th century. Limitless ambition followed by inexorable change. Technological triumph rendered obsolete by the next innovation. Greatness built to last, confronted with economic forces that care nothing for greatness. And in the end, adaptation, transformation, discovery of new purposes when the old ones fade away. If you visit the coast of destined Fort Walton Beach in the coming years, you will be able to dive to the world's largest odd reef. You could swim through corridors that once saw the footsteps of presidents and movie stars. You could pass through openings where portholes once framed views of the Atlantic. You could touch the steel and aluminum that Gibbs specified such care, now covered in marine life in St. And you can think of the 8-year-old boy who saw it launched in Philadelphia in 1994 and decided at that moment what to do with his life. You can think of the 3,000 shipyard workers who built his dream in just 2 years. You can think of the passengers who crossed the ocean in luxury and the world had never seen. You can think of the crew who kept the machine running, voyage after voyage, year after year. And you may realize that some things last longer than the purposes for which they were created. That greatness can find new meanings even when the old ones disappear. That the end of one story is often the beginning of another. The SS United States is not dead. She is just beginning her next voyage.